We begin the day with the question that has become central to the war between Iran and the U.S. Who controls the Strait of Hormuz? Today saw renewed U.S. strikes on Iranian targets, with Iran firing missiles at U.S. military sites in Jordan and Bahrain. The vital waterway, known as the Strait of Hormuz, is also now a key flashpoint, with both Iran and the U.S. claiming authority to control and patrol commercial traffic. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow stretch of water between Iran and Oman, linking the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea. Now, every tanker leaving oil-producing countries such as Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE has to pass through it. Around 1/5 of the world's traded oil and huge volumes of liquefied natural gas are moved along this route. Any disruption quickly affects global energy prices and international trade. Now, Trump says the U.S. will reimpose a naval blockade on Iran, and today he dropped his proposal to charge ships a 20% toll or transit fee. Instead, Gulf states will compensate the U.S. for securing shipping through the strait with trade and investment deals. Well, President Trump says that Tehran walked away from a deal before launching these latest attacks.
I gave them a chance. I wanted to give them a chance at making a deal. You know, we had a deal 2 days ago. It was done. And then all of a sudden, they couldn't do it. They didn't like something about the deal. They couldn't do it. And they shot first, and that was a big mistake that they shot first.
And joining me now is Thomas Juneau, professor at the University of Ottawa's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs in Ottawa, Canada. Professor, it's good to have you with us. The U.S. and Iran are back at war with each other. Was the ceasefire, was it flawed from the beginning, destined to unravel?
The ceasefire was flawed from the beginning. That was very clear. From the minute that its terms were released a few weeks ago, it was clear to every observer that the terms of the ceasefire were very vague, and also that they were not binding on either side, and that both sides, the U.S. and Iran, really did not agree on their meaning. They would interpret the vagueness of the terms in very different ways. So was it inevitable that it would come down to this? Inevitable might be just a bit too strong a word, but certainly it was very likely.
Iran says that it is the sole guardian of the Strait of Hormuz. The foreign minister even threw some shade on President Trump today by saying that Iran would be much more reasonable if it were imposing a toll. He said that we would never dare to charge 20%, as the president had suggested just yesterday. I mean, but the fact remains that Iran sees itself as the sole guardian of the strait. So nothing has been solved, has it?
Nothing has been solved, and when were looking at the terms of the ceasefire a few weeks ago when it came out, not only did it only vaguely call for the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, but what was really striking was that it basically punted down the road the resolution of all the key disagreements between the U.S. and Iran on the Strait of Hormuz, but on basically anything else. So really the easiest way to define the problematic ceasefire was that it solved nothing, and that's what we're seeing now. From Iran's perspective, the lesson number one of the war of 2026 is that closing the Strait of Hormuz, blocking it by attacking or threatening to attack maritime shipping, is the most important source of leverage that it has. It's the best way to guarantee its own security, not only the country's security, but more specifically, the regime's security. So from the regime's perspective, having very clearly learned that lesson, moving forward, what it means is that Iran will be extremely intransigent in terms of jettisoning, in terms of abandoning that control, because it is so valuable.
President Trump, as I said, on Monday, he said that the U.S. will collect a 20% toll to offset costs for keeping the Strait of Hormuz open to commercial traffic. Now, today he has reversed course, saying that the toll will be replaced by investment deals with Gulf countries. Your thoughts on that?
What is really striking here is the absolute improvisation on President Trump's part. When he said recently that the U.S. would impose a 20% toll, that made absolutely no sense. Not only legally would there be absolutely no basis for that, but administratively or bureaucratically, that is not just something that you can snap your fingers and make happen within a matter of days. It takes weeks or months to set up extremely complicated structures for that. It would have been diplomatically extraordinarily problematic. From a security perspective, it would have set up a permanent clash with the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the list goes on. It simply made absolutely no sense. So the fact that he said it, and then the fact that 24 hours later he completely backtracked, just again illustrates how the U.S. has no strategy, how the U.S. has no plan, how President Trump is basically shooting from the hip and changing his mind on what the objective is and how he's going to get there, literally on a daily basis.
What does it tell you regarding the number of choices that the U.S. has remaining in this war when it comes to dealing with Iran?
Well, that's a really good question, because given the absence of a clear, coherent, achievable strategy from day one of this war, now that we're several months into the war, the U.S. has really painted itself into a corner. And by now, there are really no plausible, achievable strategies that the U.S. could choose now and succeed. The U.S. has provided Iran with a tremendous source of leverage by allowing it, literally, to block the Strait of Hormuz and showing that militarily it cannot undo that. So now the U.S. has started striking Iran again in the past few days, but it's very clear to everybody, including to the Iranians themselves, that the U.S. is not going to succeed. Yes, it's going to destroy a bit of Iranian military infrastructure, but in terms of changing the outcome of where we're at now, it is not going to succeed. And the problem for the U.S. is that the Iranians very well understand this, and that allows them to be very intransigent and patient in these negotiations.
So you say intransigent. What do you think they're going to do, though, to push back here? I mean, are we looking at more, attacks on what they see as U.S. proxies?
I think that the Islamic Republic wants, in the long term, and like I said, it is intransigent and it can afford to be patient given where we're at now. In the long term, it wants to consolidate and institutionalize its control of the Strait of Hormuz, not only as a source of revenue, collecting fees or tolls, but also as a source of leverage on the international economy and therefore on the U.S., and as a source of security, as a way to deter future attacks by the U.S., at least attacks on a large scale. So right now, the strategy for Iran is really to transform the current reality into a long-term one.
And when you look at everything that's happening, particularly in the last 48 hours, I mean, it seems that the Gulf states may have the most to lose here, particularly if the Strait of Hormuz becomes a permanent flashpoint. I mean, do they actually want Washington taking a more assertive role, or would they rather see tensions reduced as quickly as possible?
Well, for the Gulf states, there are mostly only lose-lose scenarios moving forward. On the one hand, yes, they would absolutely want tensions to go down so that we can go back to the status quo before the war. The problem is that there is no return to the status quo before the war because Iran will continue controlling the Strait of Hormuz. So a reduction in tension in the short term basically means the reality of Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz, which is an absolute disaster for them, for their economies, but also politically, diplomatically, and for their security. So that's why right now we are seeing Gulf states being extremely aggressive in thinking about alternatives to the Strait of Hormuz, whether it's pipelines bypassing the Strait of Hormuz or other mechanisms or initiatives to diversify and increase the resilience of their own supply chains.
You say Gulf states are being aggressive. Could we also say they're just desperate?
Yes, I think aggressive might not have been the ideal choice of words. By aggressive, I mean desperate, as you say, but also very assertive in realizing that this is an extremely pressing concern. And it's almost an existential interest for them to learn to live with what inevitably will be the new reality of a Persian Gulf, a Strait of Hormuz, where there is no return to a complete freedom of navigation as it was before the war.
You know, the original justification for this war was Iran's nuclear program. Yet today, almost all of the discussion is about the Strait of Hormuz yet again. I mean, has this conflict, has it fundamentally changed? Has it morphed into something different?
It has. The issue of the nuclear program is still there. In theory, it is still something that the U.S. and Iran should begin negotiating soon. In practice, in reality, it remains a major point of divergence. It remains a major source of concern for the Gulf states in particular, who have very good reasons to be concerned, to be extremely concerned with Iran's nuclear program. Where your question is very correct is that the war of 2026 has fundamentally changed the balance of power in the region. It has created a new norm normal of a permanent Iranian threat on the Strait of Hormuz. Whether there is permanent control or not, we don't know. We still need time to figure that one out to see where the dust settles. But even if there is a return of some degree of openness in the Strait of Hormuz, things will not be the same in any case, because that threat of Iranian intervention, even if it's only a threat, even if it's not a reality of Iranian attacks in the Strait of Hormuz or in the Persian Gulf, will remain realistically for the foreseeable future.
Let me ask you, before we run out of time, if both the U.S. and Iran are using the Strait of Hormuz strictly to build leverage rather than resolve core issues such as nuclear proliferation, I mean, what in the world could a viable diplomatic approach even look like moving forward? I mean, we had a memorandum of understanding that collapsed. Would you advise less memorandum and more understanding?
In an ideal world, absolutely. But the reality is that we are absolutely, we are absolutely not in an ideal world. We're in a reality now where the two sides are deeply entrenched. The two sides are absolutely intransigent for different reasons. The two sides are very reluctant to compromise. And given the absence of a realistic, plausible diplomatic path ahead, what happens when diplomacy doesn't work, when diplomacy doesn't progress, it's the rule of the jungle. It's the law of power that will determine where the outcome sits. So right now, what is shaping outcomes is not diplomacy. It is that very real, violent struggle for control of the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, the Strait of Hormuz in the middle of a jungle, apparently. Professor Thomas Juneau, it's always good to have you on the program. Good to get your insights. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.